The call of stories, thinking, reading, and writing about what it means to be human. Think for a moment before you answer this question. How many of you consider yourselves storytellers? When I ask this question in class, I usually see a few tentative hands raised and a few others shaking their heads. No, of course I'm not a storyteller. Often the ones who admit to telling stories shyly confess that they're writers. Maybe they write short stories, they've written them in high school, or they write them on their own. Others claim to be good at regaling others with yarns and say some of their stories might even be true. But the fact is, we are all storytellers, and that includes you, whether you've ever considered yourself a storyteller or not. How can this be so? Because you spend your day telling stories. At the end of the day, you come home from work or school. How was your day, honey? Do you report it as data? How many miles you traveled, how many calories you consumed, your blood pressure numbers? Or do you relate a series of anecdotes, stories about the gossip you heard, the game of who goes first at the four-way stop sign, the conversations you had? Do you like sports? When you talk about the big game, do you relate statistics only, or do you talk about the players' personalities, the coaches you love and hate? Do you create a narrative of who did what happened when? Did you see causal relationships? If the coach hadn't gotten that technical, the team would have lost or might have won. Do you admire some players because of their life stories? Stories surround us everywhere. The news, the courtroom, the doctor's office, the airplane. Stories are also a part of history, of religion, of psychology. It is narrative that shapes the life and curiosity of the young man who set sail on the Beagle and developed a theory that would challenge everything we thought we knew, or those who set sail to a new world. We're interested in facts. Facts are important, but we are also interested in the story. Think about the major religions. We think of rules and shoulds and shalt nots, but almost all major religions are based first on narrative. In Judaism, from the creation on, stories permeate everything, from the story of a baby put into the water, saved by Pharaoh's daughter, who grew up to lead an exodus of his people, and the story of a young man who was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, but whose dreams of famine not only saved Egypt from starvation, but his own family who came to find bread. The ritual of Hanukkah arises from the story of a besieged people whose oil miraculously burned for 8 days and nights. Christianity is a series of stories beginning with an infancy narrative, this one from the Gospel of Luke. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be enrolled, each in his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be enrolled with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered. I do not have to go further, because we know where the story is leading. We know where it goes. Children recapitulated in their Christmas pageant. We have passion plays at Easter. In the Western world, even the secular calendar is based upon the onset of these events. The story has been told over and over in art, in opera, in sermons, sometimes reverently, sometimes with doubt, but it permeates our culture in such a profound, deep way that we are not always aware of it. No matter what one's religion or lack of religion, this story is foundational to how we came to be who we are in the West. And these stories are passed down many hundreds, even thousands of years. But it isn't only Western religion that arises from story, but Eastern religions as well. Buddhism, often thought of as enigmatic and aphoristics, begins with the story of Siddhartha, a rich young man who went out into the world. Troubled by the poverty he saw around him, he abandoned his wealth. At 35, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, pledging not to rise until he had gained enlightenment. And though Buddhism has its noble truths, these truths arise from narrative, from the story of the Buddha, and this religion bears his name. We've all heard it said, if you want to understand another person, walk a mile in his shoes. Many studies have shown that those who have read literature widely have more empathy for their fellow human beings. And if I can be forgiven one more reference to religion, of course much of what Jesus taught was by way of story, the parables, which are often very Zen-like in their compactness and ambiguity. This is a religion that is story within story within story. I also teach Greek and Roman mythology, with its stories going back thousands of years. Let me tell you how stories are used in the so-called real world. Oliver Sacks, a neurologist, has written a series of clinical tales about his experiences with patients, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. In the essay, Rebecca, about a young woman with profound mental and motor disabilities, Sacks recounts seeing her first on a park bench outside the hospital. She looked up and greeted him with a smile, saying elliptically, "Spring," and he nodded and smiled back, unaware of her disability. When she came inside for her appointment, he dutifully charted her many deficits. But during his time treating her, he also came to know her as she grieved the death of her beloved grandmother, comforted by the rituals of her Jewish faith, and later as she found friends among a theater group for the disabled. He was unable ever again to see her just as a patient, and not as a fully fledged person, rich in spirit if not intellect. And he writes, "What I saw in her, I now saw in them all." And he also said something quite beautiful about stories. While there are many ways of understanding the world, and they are not only valid, but all important, narrative comes first, has spiritual priority. Martha Nussbaum, a distinguished writer and professor at the University of Chicago Law School, has written extensively about literature and philosophy. She has taught courses that focus on the novel as a way of examining the ethical dilemmas inherent to practicing law. UC's website lists this as a current course, and if you'll read the description, you'll see that she's looking at satanic rituals as in probably freedom of religion arguments. But she's looking at Satan in law and literature, and she's looking at everything from Jack Nicholson in The Shining to Mick Jagger's songs. And she goes further to look at the classics, she says, that include works by Dante, Marlowe, Milton, Goethe, and John Updike, and then only looks at recent cases involving claims of Satanists. Robert Coles, a psychiatrist, pediatrician, and professor emeritus at Harvard Medical School, has written extensively about children's issues. At Harvard, he taught a course called The Call of Stories that focused on the works of William Carlos Williams, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and others as a way of having future physicians think about their practice not just from a technical perspective, but a human one. The course was one of the most popular electives, filling up every semester. Other medical courses and seminars have used classic literature, most notably Philoctetes by Sophocles. In this play, a wounded soldier is abandoned because his fellow warriors cannot bear listening to his moans. And when the son of Achilles comes to steal a magic bow, the only thing that has kept Philoctetes from starving, he learns that it is not just physical healing that the man craves, but someone to understand his pain. Jonathan Shea is a psychiatrist who works with Vietnam veterans with compound post-traumatic stress syndrome. This is the kind that impairs their ability to reintegrate into society, leaving too many victims of abandonment, substance abuse, homelessness, and hopelessness. When Shea searched for ways to help them, he found himself thinking about his patients not just from the standpoint of blood tests and urine samples and MRIs and medication protocols, but from the perspective of what he calls moral wounding, the way society wounds our soldiers, not just from the standpoint of asking them to risk their lives, but by not keeping our promises and by asking them to do that which for us is unthinkable. And he found inspiration in the epic poems of Homer, who nearly 3,000 years ago wrote about a war in a city lost to time and myth long before even Homer was born, on the western coast of Turkey. So, why am I asking you this term to write about stories? Well, practically speaking, we have to write about something. The course focuses on analyzing texts. As freshmen, you're majoring in a myriad of subjects, and I can't create a reading bank of texts for them all. But on a more important level, because research shows the following: reading good literature leads to empathy with others. Reading good literature improves your ability to read in general, because instead of simply searching for information, we're forced to examine details, suspend judgment, and draw conclusions about questions for which there may be more than one valid answer. While we may have many majors, almost none of us will spend our working lives cocooned away from others. We will need not only practical skills, but the ability to work with and serve other people, to listen to their stories, and understand how our own have influenced our preconceptions, attitudes, and reactions. Reading and writing about literature this semester will hone your critical thinking skills, including analyzing, taking the text apart, synthesizing, putting our own ideas and various texts together, and considering other points of view and perspectives. Most students really like it better than another semester of arguing about the death penalty, legalizing marijuana, or another social issue. And while I hope that you'll like all the stories, I just about guarantee you that you'll like some of them and that you will find that they'll stay with you for a really long time. So to recap, you're not only a storyteller, you're a story, as am I. At our desk, the obituary may list our accomplishments and our survivors, but trust me, at the funeral or celebration of life, it will be all story, all memories that will be the focus, all of those little moments that, at least in retrospect, seem to make up a life.